Welcome to the Deep Dive, the shortcut to being well-informed, where we break down complex topics using the notes you send us. Today, we're stepping into a surprisingly unsettling corner of cognitive science. We're talking about the simple act of staring at your own reflection. I mean, it sounds mundane, right? Maybe a little vain. But as the research shows, if you keep a fixed, unwavering gaze for, say, 10 minutes or more, especially in low light, you might witness something genuinely bizarre happen to your own face. So the core question we're unpacking today is this: why? Why, when you stare deeply into your own eyes, does your brain suddenly decide that the face staring back isn't yours anymore? Why does it start showing you distorted figures, strange characters, or, and this is in a lot of documented cases, something that looks like a monster from your worst nightmares?
That phenomenon is precisely what our sources document as the mirror illusion effect. And our mission here is to move past the eerie anecdote and really explore the underlying biology and psychology that makes this visual break happen. We're going to dive into the mechanism that causes your self-image to quite literally fall apart.
Okay, so the goal is to understand not just what people are seeing, but why their brain is making them see it. And it seems to center on this idea of perceptual fatigue and what the brain does to fill in the gaps.
Exactly.
So where do we start?
To really get it, we have to understand the core engine of this shift, which is a process called face dissociation. This is the state the brain enters when it's faced with a stable, repetitive, and unmoving visual input.
Face dissociation, that's a fascinating phrase. I mean, when you think of dissociation in a clinical sense, you think of a disconnect from reality or from yourself. How does that apply here to just looking at a face?
It's a really similar concept, just on a cognitive level. Face dissociation is, at its heart, a form of perceptual breakdown. Think about how we normally process faces. Our eyes are always moving, right? They're making these tiny, rapid movements called saccades. And these movements constantly refresh the visual input. They allow the part of your brain that recognizes faces, the fusiform gyrus, to constantly stabilize and fixate the features into a whole cohesive person.
But when you're staring, you're stopping that.
You're deliberately inhibiting those micro-movements. You are, in effect, starving your visual processing centers of the dynamic, fresh input they need to function. After a while, the brain starts to see the input, your own face, as just meaningless, constant visual static.
So the problem isn't that the mirror is changing. The problem is that the brain is getting bored, fatigued by the lack of new data.
That's a perfect way to put it, yes. It's like sensory deprivation, but focused entirely on a single object.
And so when the brain loses that steady stream of information, the circuits that are responsible for keeping everything stable, keeping your nose where your nose should be, your chin where your chin should be, they just start to fail.
They start to fail. That is face dissociation. It's the state where the brain loses its ability to reliably maintain the visual consistency of the self.
Okay, so if the brain stops getting the signals it needs to keep the image stable, what does it do? What's its default response? Does everything just go black? Or does it try to compensate somehow?
Oh, it absolutely compensates. The brain cannot tolerate visual uncertainty, especially not with something as fundamental as a human face. Our visual systems are, they're relentless pattern seekers. So when the input gets ambiguous because of this fatigue, the brain doesn't just show you a blur, it starts to spontaneously and randomly reassemble the features it's trying to process. It's desperately searching for any recognizable pattern it can lock onto.
Okay, let's explore that, this chaotic reassembly. If the face is constantly glitching inside the visual cortex, what does that actually look like? What are the specific ways the image breaks apart?
Right, so the process isn't random in its effects, even if the underlying mechanism is a breakdown. The brain is trying to make sense of fragmented data. And this leads to what researchers call feature binding failure. It's struggling to bind the separate components, the eyes, the mouth, the contour of the face, into one single stable identity.
Feature binding failure.
Exactly. And when people report on this experience, the changes happen fast. And they're dramatic. One of the most common things people see is a really significant distortion of the eyes.
The eyes.
Yeah, they often appear to become much wider than normal, or sometimes they look like deep black holes. The brain seems to exaggerate the features that are most essential for recognition.
That focus on the eyes makes a lot of sense. They're the primary anchor for recognizing who someone is. But the notes here go further than just exaggeration. One of the most striking details is the idea that features can just vanish.
They absolutely can.
Yeah.
The temporary disappearance of the mouth is something that gets reported all the time.
Wow.
You can think of it as the brain momentarily dropping the data packet for the mouth. It decides it's less critical than the eyes or the overall shape of the head when it's trying to do a rapid re-render.
And a face without a mouth is, I mean, that's instantly dehumanizing. It would trigger a really strong negative reaction.
A very strong one.
It sounds kind of like an advanced version of the Gestalt principle. The brains need to see a complete form, but it's being applied to a failing system. The brain is trying to complete the face, but the parts it has are corrupted, so the outcomes are just bizarre.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
And this leads to the ultimate result of the illusion. You perceive a completely strange, alien, or unrecognizable face. It stops being your reflection. It becomes a new entity created by these failing recognition circuits, but based on the original template. It's the visual system basically saying, okay, I know this is a face, but I no longer know whose face it is, so I'm just going to invent a new one.
That phrase, I will invent a new one, is the perfect transition because that takes us out of just sensory processing and into the psychological dimension. And this is where things get genuinely compelling and, frankly, pretty frightening.
Right. So now we move to the central question. Once the visual framework collapses and the brain has these gaps, why does it overwhelmingly fill them with monstrous, terrifying images? Why not, a static portrait?
Or a
Smiling friend.
And this is where the personalized horror show begins. When the brain is starved of that external data and it's forced to use internal data, where is it pulling those terrifying images from? Is it just random?
No, not at all. There is a definite prioritization going on, and this is where our evolutionary psychology kicks in. Your brain, when it's confronted with ambiguous visual data, especially data related to a face, it immediately defaults to a threat assessment mode.
Ah, survival instinct.
Than to miss a real threat. And this whole phenomenon demonstrates the power of what psychologists call the negativity bias in perception.
Negativity bias.
Yeah. When the brain is forced to fill a blank space, it frequently accesses its stored psychological archives.
Yeah.
And the most intensely encoded, emotionally charged images are the easiest and fastest to retrieve. And those images, unfortunately for the person staring into the mirror, are our deep-seated fears, our anxieties, and even our memories of trauma.
So the visual system sends out this fragmented signal like ambiguous face detected, high priority for threat identification. And then the emotional system, driven by the amygdala, responds instantly with the most potent data it has on file.
Precisely. If you have an intense, stored memory of a specific archetype, whether it's an image of a monster from your childhood, a traumatic memory, or just a deep existential fear, that emotional data gets a fast track to your visual cortex when things get ambiguous. It is the most robust internal file available to complete that visual pattern.
That means the person is effectively looking at a visual representation of their own subconscious fears projected right onto their reflection. It's not some generic ghost they're seeing. It's a highly specific, custom-built terror.
Absolutely. The terrifying faces people report are often distinct entities. Distorted relatives, ancient-looking people, monstrous archetypes, or figures associated with, occult themes. The consistency across all subjects is that the image carries an intense, personalized emotional charge.
So if the brain is using stored memories, could the experience be affected by your mood? Like if someone tries this while they're relaxed versus when they're stressed or anxious, would the projection be different?
That's a critical question. And it gets to the subjective nature of perception. While the visual mechanism, the face dissociation, is constant, the content of the projection is highly variable. It's absolutely susceptible to your current psychological state.
I see.
High levels of anxiety or recent stress would certainly prime those fear archives, making it far more likely that the filling mechanism defaults to something terrifying or distorted.
So this experience, it really highlights how fragile our self-image actually is.
It really is.
We think we see ourselves objectively, but this simple exercise proves that the external data of self is constantly being filtered and interpreted through the lens of our entire psychological history, our fears, our anxieties, our memory biases. The natural human reaction then, the fear of doing it again, or avoiding dark mirrors like the listener mentioned, it's really an avoidance of self-confrontation. You're not scared of the mirror. You're scared of what your own brain might show you about your deepest buried fears.
It is the ultimate feedback loop. The face breaks down, the psychological fear rushes in to fill the gap, and the resulting terrifying image just reinforces the original fear. It completes the cycle of personalized horror.
That depth of insight is incredible. It takes the whole phenomenon from just a spooky ghost story to a profound example of how the brain creates subjective reality from objective input. So let's quickly synthesize the fascinating journey we've just taken here. We started by defining the key mechanism, which is called face dissociation. That's the failure of the brain to stabilize a constant visual image because of perceptual fatigue. Then we explored the mechanics of that breakdown. We noted that this destabilization causes what you called feature binding failure, and that results in specific distortions like unnaturally wide eyes or the total disappearance of the mouth, turning your own face into something unrecognizable. And finally, we uncovered the psychological depth. When the brain finds gaps in the visual field, it uses the fastest, most potent information in its emotional archives. And because of that evolutionary negativity bias, those are often our deep-seated fears and anxieties. The monster you see is a custom projection of your own subconscious terror.
So what does this all mean? Well, for the curious learner, this profound susceptibility of perception to our own internal pressures reveals that the face you see in the mirror is. It's far more subjective than you ever imagined. It's a constant synthesis of what's actually there in your stored emotional context. The fact that we can trigger this personalized collapse with just a simple fixed stare really shows the limits of our visual constancy.
That makes the reflection an active participant in our psychological landscape, not just a passive observation.
It does. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. If the specific terrifying figures you see during the mirror illusion effect are derived directly from your own individualized stored old fears, then the faces you see, the specific alien, the specific ancestor, that specific shadow entity, are they not, in fact, a perfectly personalized visual key? Could this experience function as a powerful, if accidental, psychological diagnostic tool, offering direct visual insight into the specific fears or unprocessed anxieties stored deepest within your memory?
The ultimate horror movie is the one starring your own reflection, written by your subconscious. That is a powerful thought to leave with.
Indeed. Be careful what you stare at.
Always. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.